on TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV.
Good evening and welcome to the Independent Republican Mike Graham. You're with Talk. We're on TV, we're on radio, we're online, and of course we're on your smart speaker as well. Coming up, 11th hour desperation from Rishi Sunak as he marches rebel Tory MPs to yet another Rwanda vote, for heaven's sake, while the polls predict complete electoral devastation. And breaking the internet after a series of Photoshop fails, it's Kate Middleton, who's apparently been spotted in a Windsor garden centre, apparently. And we speak to London chippy owner ordered by a Killjoy council to take down a Union Jack mural in Britain, folks. Stay where you are, Henry Bolton. I'll come back to you in a second, but I want to introduce the panel now because I've got Madeline Grant, I've got Lord Dodsworth, and I've got Andrew Eborn here with me. I'm quite a sensible Tory MP. I've not really seen much of that recently.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise.
Calm heads to prevail and,
yes,
and not wanting a leadership contest.
Right.
But
yeah.
I think there are actually more than you think that do adopt that attitude, frankly.
I'm sure
I think
true.
that obviously it's in the interest of journalists to big up, and you never know quite where it's coming from because often it is anonymous briefing.
Yeah.
When no one is named, it could be sort of, sounds like it could be 12 MPs or it could just be one. I mean,
right.
we have no idea
right.
precisely the scale of the
I mean, I guess the
plotting.
difficulty for Rishi Sunak is Penny Mordaunt continues to say nothing.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in taking over from Rishi Sunak. I think he's a brilliant Prime Minister. Why? I don't know why people keep mentioning my name. She hasn't said that, has she?
Hasn't she?
No.
No.
Well, Kemi Badenoch's denied all of the plotting, hasn't she?
So that one must be true.
So that that one must be true. I mean, Penny Mordaunt did a great job, didn't she, last year, of carrying a sword?
Yes. She did.
In her new ceremonial role.
Yes.
But I mean, that's about all I can think of. I think that she's just too sort of, can I just say, a bit too wet. And I think that there'd be a real misunderstanding of what that quite new fragile voter base and the Red Wall really wants.
I'm told she's a very good Conservative local MP, though, for Portsmouth.
Yes.
People down there really like her.
Yep.
You know. So, I mean, she has that in her favour. But, I mean, again, it's a bit of a poison chalice, isn't it, Andrew?
Oh, it's total poison chalice.
I mean, if somebody
and
came to me and said, would you like to be leading Conservative? I would say no.
Really?
No,
I think you'll be very good.
I would be good, but, you know, this is not the time, Andrew.
The reality is this, is that Penny hasn't turned round and said no.
Right.
And that's the interesting thing. Because normally what people do, they turn around and they deny, of course, no, we must support the current leader and so on and so forth. It would be interesting to get our fourth female Prime Minister within that time. And they're talking about working on that sort of premise, that they're gearing up for the next sort of side. But the fact that she hasn't come out begs all sorts of questions. Because normally what they do, and it always follows a pattern, they always deny everything. I'm right behind Rishi is what she should have said. She hasn't, so I'm sure that her political ambitions will come to the forefront eventually.
Yeah, I mean, the smart money's on, let's wait and see what happens in the May local elections, isn't it?
I think part of the reason for the PM's allegedly optimistic feeling is just based on the fact that, you know, we will start to see inflation going lower. You know, you could have Rwanda flights, albeit perhaps not enough to make a massive point to and say, look, the medicine is working, things are turning around, the economy is doing better.
But people
and in the end, it didn't really make any difference to how people felt.
I think the difference now is that Blair was quite an interesting kind of possibility for people, whereas Starmer isn't really, is he? I mean, he's not interesting. They're not saying they've got anything interesting to do.
You're right. They're voting against as opposed to something for. You're not voting for Starmer, you're voting against the Tories. I don't think it's going to be as bad for them as people make out, because the reality is it's appalling at the moment. What would you expect a leader to say? Not that I'm in a dismal position, but I'm in a really good... They're all everybody's behind me. Maybe they're stabbing him.
I mean, I would find it quite refreshing if you came out one day and just went, this is an absolute nightmare.
It is.
You know, my job is the worst job. I never thought it'd be this bad. I can't believe I'm still here. But we'll have an election soon. I won't be here for much longer. But that'd be great, wouldn't it?
But you're absolutely right, but as always. But what happens, everybody's going to remember his 5 promises, and most of which are easy. The inflation bit when it was at 11%, I promise I'm going to get it half there. Stop the boats. Piers will lose his £1,000 bet. There will be at least one, because he bet Rishi there's going to be no flights at all before the election.
Right.
And I think there'll be at least one flight. Okay. The crazy thing is, what the FT says, it's working about £230,000 per person that you send to Rwanda, and which is complete madness. What you need to look at, as the point was made earlier, it's supposed to be a deterrent. If we can deter people from coming over, then that's got to make sense.
Yes. We've got to go. We'll come back to this in a second. Sorry. You're watching the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. Coming up, another day, another bonkers leadership plot in the party. And we've been talking about rebel MPs trying to topple the Prime Minister. We'll have more of that after this. Welcome back. You're watching the Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here on Talk TV. Wallowing in number 10 with no mates, it's Rishi Sunak, who is electorally screwed after Lee Anderson's defection. Plus, reports of a raft of MPs wishing to leave the party have led to knives being brandished by rebels who want the Prime Minister's head on a plate. Let's bring back Maddie, Andrew and Laura Dodsworth.
And, you know, let's not forget that in 2019, one thing that massively helped them was the fact that Nigel Farage agreed to stand back the Brexit Party in those seats. And there's actually quite a lot of very prominent people in the Labour Party who owe their existence as MPs to the fact that the Brexit Party ran in these seats. People like Yvette Cooper wouldn't be in the House of Commons. Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary. Like, we forget how well they did and how much worse for the Tories it could have been without that.
Absolutely.
And they're definitely not going to do that this time around.
No, definitely not. Just before
Richard
we carry on,
made it very clear he's not going to. He's written to everybody saying we're not going to step aside.
And people never change their minds before elections,
of course
do they?
not.
So that must be not going to happen. Let's look at Rishi Sunak today, though. He insisted today that he was not interested in Westminster politics, rather strangely, because he said he wanted to make sure that the party was all together behind him. Here he is speaking on the matter a little bit earlier.
I'm not interested in all Westminster politics. It doesn't matter. What matters is the future of our country. And that's what I'm squarely focused on. That's what I get up every morning working as hard as I can to deliver, whether it's cutting people's taxes, increasing the state pension, today increasing the number of apprenticeships and talking to small businesses. Those are the things that matter to people. And as we've seen over the last few weeks, our plan is working. Inflation is coming down. Wages are growing. The economy is back to growing again. And if we stick to this plan, I can deliver a brighter future for everyone in our country. That's what I'm doing.
Well, really? I mean, the economy's growing by 0.2%, right?
It still makes me cross that he was the Chancellor that presided over all the money printing, the furlough, and the disastrous economic consequences of lockdown. This is where we are, where we why we are where we are.
This is where the plan has got us to, Andrew.
Yeah.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. I think the reality is we need a leader that has very clear policies, and this is his selling point. If he keeps telling everybody, look, Labour has no policies, and you keep saying, look, here are my policies, this is what we're going to stand against, and forget all this silly little petty politics and people backstabbing. What you need to do is think about the country. If you make people scared, it was P.T. Barnum and also the father of PR who turned around and said that the best way of selling anything to people is through fear. If you make people scared that we're on a path to recovery, and if you don't continue on this path, you're going to lose out, that's the way he could win this election.
Yeah, but the trouble is, I think most people now don't believe a word that either party says, do they? I mean, that's the problem. They're not even being frightened by Rishi Sunak. They just don't believe him anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, you know, right. So I think he's been very unlucky in some ways. I mean, has made mistakes. Some mistakes on his watch, some very bad communication. But he's also slightly the victim of things beyond his control. But after all, he did want this job. You know? And
also, I mean, everything's always going to be outside of your control. I mean, you know, it's the events.
Well, for example, the Rwanda policy. I think he sort of felt at the time that he became Tory leader that he basically, in order to kind of show the right of his party that he meant business, he had to kind of tether himself to the Rwanda policy, which was the brainchild of Boris Johnson and Priti Patel. And I mean, obviously, the big mistake was then not showing that there was just one of many things they were trying to do, and it's become the absolute focal point of migration policy. And that was a big communications error. But there are sort of things that are, I don't think are entirely his fault, but, you know, them's the break.
But also he's in charge, and he will have to take the rap, I'm afraid, won't he?
If one plane takes off, I think it is going to be a win for Rishi Sunak. Now, whether you think it's a suitable deterrent or not, and, you know, there's arguments on both sides, you know, about whether Australia's offshore system has worked. I don't think that's the point. I think what any kind of casual, ordinary observer can see is that our parliamentary sovereign law is being thwarted by people who use international law to try to stop something that they ideologically oppose. And that feels fundamentally unfair, wrong. It's a misuse of law.
Undemocratic.
It's undemocratic. And that in itself is the bothersome thing. I mean, there's also the sunk cost fallacy. I mean, this by now is terrifying. We spent 240 billion on Rwanda, million, sorry,
Yes.
240 million on Rwanda until the end of
sure.
2023. But it's going to go to 370 million. And nobody wants to be lost in a sunk cost fallacy. But you think, well, you know, we spent that much, let's at least get one plane off the ground.
Right.
We spend £8 million a day on asylum housing costs.
It's shocking.
You know what?
It's insane. So if it might work as a deterrent, it's worth it. But what he would show is that he's beaten the blob.
Yes.
And I think that would really rouse quite a lot of support in his favour.
Yeah. I think you also have to look at what is happening in other parts of Britain. You know, I read an amazing piece by Matthew Syed this weekend in the Sunday Times. He went to Rochdale, got off the train. He saw 6 mosques within earshot of, or within sort of, you know, eyesight of the train station. There's a school opposite the train station. It's got 450 kids in it. Only one of them is white. Now, you know, you can make any argument you like, but that is not the Britain that an awful lot of people are used to, and not the sort of Britain that a lot of people want to live in. And, you know, that's already gone. And I'm sure there are other places like Rochdale. There's also a massive, you know, problem with poor white underclass kids as well, who go to another school which is more or less completely white. You know, but there's a lot of segregation now in society, a lot of it caused by mass immigration.
Well, it's the failure of multiculturalism, because if you laud diversity itself as a quality to aspire
for its own sake.
it is literally opposed to the principle of integration.
It doesn't work.
Integration is absolutely key.
It just cannot work. And it's been a huge failure of this government.
What you are going to find, though, Sunak's going to start getting some wins on all of his 5 promises. I can guarantee over the next few years.
Well, I look forward to you apologising to me down the road when that turns out to be completely not
You should be doing a wager. That's Talk TV.
yeah,
style,
well,
isn't it?
that's
what they do on Piers Morgan's
£1,000.
show, because they've got loads of money.
Exactly.
You know, that's not what we do here. Thank you very much indeed, though.
Thank you.
Madeline and Laura and, of course, Andrew. We'll have you all back very shortly. You're watching the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. The Princess of Wales has been spotted out in public. But will it do anything to silence the speculation? More on this coming up. Don't go anywhere. With me, Telegraph columnist Paddy Grant, author and journalist Laura Dodsworth, and barrister and broadcaster Andrew Eborn. Not technically still with me because they've only just come back, but welcome. Thank you very much indeed for all of that. Now, we've got loads to talk about because we've got to kick off, surely, the story of the day, the Victoria and Albert Museum.
Yes.
And the disgraceful manoeuvre by Tristram Hunt, who's not as woke as you might think, because apparently he did actually stand up to the gender Nazis a little while ago. But he decided it was a great idea to put on an exhibition of what was comedy, but they didn't do it right. Because, I mean, I've said earlier on that they've linked Margaret Thatcher in with, you know, villains, contemporaneous villains like Osama bin Laden and Hitler. They're not really villains, are they? They're actually mass killers. Yeah. So, you know, here we have, as usual, the left kind of demonising Margaret Thatcher, which they can't seem to get enough of doing. And I said in my little monologue about her that she completely changed Britain. A lot of people who now hate Margaret Thatcher weren't alive when she was around, and certainly weren't alive before she was around, because Britain, before she came into power in 1979, was not a very nice place to live.
Yeah, there's many times I've wished we had clones of Margaret Thatcher to take the helm again. I mean, it's just a caricature dummy of her. Is it from Spitting Image?
It's from Spitting Image,
and it's with some kind of Punch and Judy characters and the rest of it. But what they did was they linked her in the same sentence with Osama bin Laden and Adolf Hitler, which is, it's a little beyond the pale.
Yes.
You know, that's what's really objectionable. The thing is, the V&A does seem to have a bit of an issue with Margaret Thatcher.
They do.
Because in the past, her family offered her complete wardrobe, including wedding dress, and they turned it down because they said they don't want clothes for social and cultural reasons, only for the aesthetic value, which of course makes no sense at all, because aesthetic values
David Bowie,
are always completely linked to social and cultural values. Why is the Princess Diana of Wales wedding dress more aesthetically valuable than Margaret Thatcher's wedding dress? I know some people have clever answers to that, but anyway, it was obviously about an ideological
It's ideological, isn't it?
disposition. And the thing is that, you know, you just get the sense that what underpins all of this with these museums is a kind of a wokeness that's crept in. You know, it's in the National Trust slavery exhibitions. It's in the National Maritime Museum's recent Queer History Night, where they tried to queer Admiral Nelson, which is just ridiculous for such a vigorously heterosexual man. And you know, it was in 2022 the International Council of Museums changed the definition of a museum.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying the change of definition of museum is what's created the change in all the museums and art galleries, but it's all kind of linking it. There's this underpinning wokeness. And for the first time, museums are defined by using words like ethics and sustainability and inclusivity, which is not really what we thought of museums as being about.
And we've seen the British Museum, haven't we, have this terrible kind of navel-gazing episode where we're going to give all the stuff back and take it all out of the museum and send it back to wherever they got it from.
It is extraordinary.
I mean, what's the point of having a museum if you can't have stuff from elsewhere?
You're absolutely. What's interesting as well about this, though, Mike, is that the stories really come about as a result of what's been written about the exhibition rather than the exhibition itself. So what I did, in the interest of researching this programme, I went to the V&A today. And I had a look.
We've got pictures of you going there.
Look at me. I've been along there. There you are. There's me in front of all Mussolini and other bits and pieces.
Right.
There's also me in front of Maggie Thatcher,
yes,
which we've got over here as well. And what they're trying to do is say, look, contemporary, this is what they do. That's me originally. That's a long time ago. That's me with Maggie Thatcher.
Is that you on the left there?
That's me on the left here the first time. Left with Maggie Thatcher. Everybody's
when
on the
was
left
that picture taken?
A couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But this is when I used to work for Dentsu, the big Japanese advertising agency. So if you ever saw Lost in Translation, that was all about taking the big stars to Japan to do advertising campaigns. Yes. And so we took Maggie Thatcher. And you took Maggie Thatcher, you got Jeffrey Archer for free, which was interesting.
Yes. Lots of people went to Japan to do adverts that they would never do.
Exactly. So I did Stephen Hawking. I took him for Uniqlo and various other people as well.
I'm sure you're a barrister.
I know it's broken rights, intellectual property. That's what you specialise in. But I went along to the V&A, and this is the important point, is that what they were trying to say in the whole exhibit is all about comedy. And you knock the people in power. So it's all, there's Boris Johnson there, there's the Queen Mother there, all in the same exhibition. And they're talking about that sort of stuff. And Punch and Judy, which is, 362 years old in this country, and that's what they do. You get the current
I get all
figures
that,
and
but the thing is,
stuff.
they deliberately didn't make that the point. I mean, I understand how Punch and Judy, I think, is originally Italian.
Yes.
And then what they have done in more modern times is they've set the sort of the good guys and the bad guys as politicians in the same way that you get those, Guy Fawkes parades in places like Lewis, and they have, But the thing is, they always attack right-wingers.
Yes.
They never have a left-winger. They're never burning an effigy of Jeremy Corbyn. They're always burning an effigy of Boris Johnson or burning an effigy of Margaret Thatcher. They don't, and I think that...
Well, I wonder if that will change, if it has something to do with who's actually in charge.
I don't think it will, because I go back to... I mean, I can't remember any left-wing leader being sort of in any way vilified in the same way
Did they ever do Blair? I wouldn't be surprised if they'd done Blair after Iraq.
Tony Blair is in the exhibit. They have a picture of Private Eye, and they have...
But Blair is only hated now because he's not left-wing enough.
Oh, right.
He's not hated for being a lefty. He's hated for not being a lefty.
But
and for the Iraq War.
And for the Iraq War,
But they didn't put Tony Blair in the sentence with Osama bin Laden and Adolf Hitler. That was reserved for Margaret Thatcher. Well, and that's what's so objectionable about it.
And that's the thing. It's the write-up about the exhibition rather than the exhibition
I think,
itself.
no, but I mean, what I...
Oh,
sorry, go on.
Oh, I've never, every time I've been to any exhibition, whether it's a museum or whether it's artwork, I'm always baffled and horrified by how poorly written, the absolute gibberish that they have on the blurb. It's obvious, it's kind of like meaningless, piffle, Judith Butler language that now has absolutely infested academia these days. And it's
because they can't describe anything,
but it's absolutely not there to illuminate the painting, for example. I went to the Hogarth exhibition at the Tate, I think it was a few years ago, and I could not believe it was all about, for example, you could have a wonderful, wonderful series like Marriage a la Mode, one of his most famous series of engravings, and underneath it would just talk about, for example, how some of the products in these pictures had come from around the world because it was the time of the empire. And I just think all the things that you might say about Marriage a la Mode to kind of go in on the fact that the hairbrush came from Barbados or whatever. I just thought, you guys are really missing the point.
They are. Yeah. But like all of these things, whenever they sort of wokeify anything, they take away the truth and they insert this sort of nebulous, very vague description of everything, which is entirely incorrect because they can't use the real words.
Well, they obviously don't love what it is they're describing. It makes me think, well, how are these people end up in charge of our most valuable museums and art galleries if they fundamentally don't like Hogarth, for example? You know, it's like giving like a priceless artwork to like a chimpanzee. You know, they don't care about the thing. We care.
But this goes back to. Sorry, I must make this point. This goes back to the way that sort of comedians and the BBC, I blame as well, have kind of allowed the vilification of people like Margaret Thatcher. Don't forget, when she didn't want a state funeral, but she was given a kind of, official funeral, and there were people actually booing. People, I mean, there wasn't a majority of people.
Not many, but
Not many, but the fact was they were still there. And these are the kind of socialist worker scumbags, you know, these kind of people.
She would have liked that.
She might have
She would have said that, you know, when they've run out of things to talk about, when they go for the personal, it shows they have nothing else to say. She would have seen it as a proof of her victory, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. But it goes back to, you know, the old jokes. You know, it's all right to make a joke about throwing battery acid over Nigel Farage, but you can't say anything about Diane Abbott. You know,
absolutely.
It's ridiculous. It's completely, you know, lopsided. Anyway, sorry.
Well, I think these curators don't like the art and they don't like us. And because they don't like the art, I don't like going to art galleries anymore.
Yeah.
So after COVID, after the lockdowns ended, I thought, great, we can get back out to museums and National Trust and art galleries, and I detested it. First of all, you had to book on a timed entry, which was just a bore and took all the spontaneity and joy out of visits. But then all the notes had changed. It's part of this inclusivity ethics thing that comes from the International Council of Museums. Went to the Rossetti exhibition last year at Tate, Britain, and it's hard to imagine how they could spoil a Rossetti exhibition, but they had. It was the same thing. You know, where there were black faces in paintings, there had to be lots of self-flagellating about the empire and slavery.
Right. Did they have trigger warnings as well?
And the very last picture you saw on the way out was they'd picked some kind of... It was a photograph of two men kissing, which was supposed to be in the style of Rossetti. And I thought, why would you make that the last image you see?
Right.
Not that I've got any problem with men kissing, obviously, but it was so peripheral to an exhibition about Rossetti. They just had to insert something that was LGBT into it, and every exhibition now is like that. And they've taken all of the joy and the pleasure and the pride in art away.
Because they're ashamed of it. That's the bottom line.
Well, that's the problem. If you're curating, but you're curating the message, and I think this is the difficulty, is you're turning around. Comedy's always about taking the mickey out of people, and so on and so forth. And it should be.
I'm quite happy with brutal comedy. I don't mind that.
And interesting,
I object to it being ideologically based.
That's the point. But also within the same exhibition, they talked about Queen Victoria, who was bossy and big-bottomed, and also they had Queen Elizabeth II, our dear late Queen, is depicted as a nutcracker. Pun intended.
Can you imagine them calling Michelle Obama big-bottomed?
Exactly. There you go.
But they'd never say it.
No, they wouldn't say that. But
and I don't really care whether she is or not. But they'd never say it.
She's not in the way that Queen Victoria was broader than.
I'll take your word on that. I mean, I'm not an expert on.
Michelle Obama looks great, but yeah.
But you make a valid point. You would not be able to say that about a black woman in an exhibition.
You wouldn't.
But you could
because it would be shut down.
Yeah.
And you would be, you know, they would be on the front page of the Guardian. It would be disgrace. You know, people would be hounded out of town.
Aren't we being a bit snowflakey about satire?
Maybe.
I mean, isn't it? That's part of the British comic.
Yeah, but as I say, I'm not against the satire. I'm not against people being horrible about Margaret Thatcher at all.
Yeah.
I object to the fact that it's so one-sided.
No, you're absolutely. George Carlin made the point that the secret of comedy, knowing where the line is and going beyond it.
Well, Steve Martin said comedy is not pretty, and it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be.
It should be brutal. It should be absolutely savage. But you're not allowed to be savage.
But it should be blind.
Ricky Gervais does it because he's so rich he doesn't care. But look, I mean, even he's being disowned now by the lefty sort of, you know, people like, what's his name, Doucette, what's his name? That guy, BBC left-wing comedian, Lysette.
Yes.
Joe Lysette. Who said, you know, no, Ricky Gervais is just getting lazy now. He's attacking minorities.
And you're like,
he's not attacking minorities. He's being funny.
He's attacking the bigotry.
But you're not allowed to make jokes about things which apparently are sensitive.
No, but his point is he's not. He's go for it.
Isn't about the satire.
Exactly.
Satire should be savage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Art can be political and polarising. The curation of it
that's the point.
Should not be.
Exactly.
It's the write-up. You're absolutely right.
It's the museum, it's the managers, it's the curators, it's those horrible, annoying little plaques next to the pieces.
And I did ask...
And the dimwits who are writing the blurbs.
Yeah, exactly. I did ask the V&A. I said to them, we're coming on your brilliant programme tonight. They said they never miss an episode.
They throw you out then.
They always throw me out. But I did ask, look, let me know beforehand.
Yes.
The person I spoke to said, look, we're just trying to curate, this is about comedy. I wanted somebody officially to talk about how they'd written it up. But it's how they've written it up which is the issue. Yeah. And the thing about Ricky Gervais is he's not trying to offend the people he's offending.
I think he is. I hope he is.
He's highlighting the bigotry towards the people, and that's the point. It's a different focus. And I think what's happened here, the blurb which we've had about putting Maggie Thatcher together with these other appalling people, is basically the wrong blurb. Yeah. Highlighting comedy and attacking public figures is what comedy's all about. Yeah. And Punch, to his credit, and violence and everything else.
Again, it's about the kind of the unfair sort of bias, I suppose.
Yes.
Because you get kids now coming through school And if you ask them about Margaret Thatcher, who they've never seen, they've
Yes.
never lived under, they will say, "Oh yeah, that's the evil, horrible woman,
The villain, yes.
who took everybody's milk away."
Yeah.
You know, I actually remember when she did it. I was very pleased she did because I hated the milk.
Thatcher, the milk snatcher, or whatever it was, yes.
Thatcher when she was education minister.
Yeah.
You know, but anyway, let's talk about something else which is equally irksome. The BBC once again urged to
Yes.
get rid of, or at least to suspend these 2 employees from BBC Arabic who have been reported since October the 7th. I can't believe they haven't been suspended yet. But this time a Tory MP has said, you know, can we not actually suspend these 2? The BBC has now become a sort of, I don't know, a kind of a watch place for anti-Semitism.
It's extraordinary. You would think that the reason history repeats itself is because they don't learn the lessons from history. And how often do they sort of turn around and say, look, there's a problem here. How quickly have you dealt with it? And yet again, this is going to come up. And we were discussing earlier in the break, this is not going to be the only 2 people. There's going to be lots of people. If you look at who they've retweeted, look at the posts that they've made within the BBC, huge organisation, there's going to be many more issues.
Well, just in their basic news coverage,
Yeah.
such as when they reported that Israel had bombed a hospital in Gaza,
Yeah.
and actually it was a Gaza misfired rocket.
Right.
They immediately believed the word of Hamas every time over casualties. I mean,
And that goes on all the time.
No, all the
And
time.
they
These
refused
two are
to
the
call
tip of the
Hamas
iceberg.
terrorists as well for a long time.
They were dragged kicking and screaming
Well, they still
into
don't.
calling them a
They now say,
proscribed
but they now
terrorist
say they are a
organisation.
prescribed terrorist. They wouldn't
Yeah,
even say that
but they give
before.
it the long moniker rather than just say that they're terrorists.
Yeah.
So that pro-Hamas bias is, I'd say, sedimented throughout all of their news coverage. And those 2 have only become apparent because the tweets they liked and the tweets they wrote. One of them actually wrote that Israel is a terrorist apartheid state.
Yeah.
So it's not just a question of liking something by mistake. They've
Oh, no.
actively written
Well, they were also
things.
liking the celebrations and the dancing that was going on in Tunisia, in Lebanon, and in the Gaza Strip, as I said earlier on the show. You know, those images of the young women being paraded through Gaza where people were spitting on them.
Yeah,
you know, they were liking all that kind of stuff. And that's, you know what's interesting? I just found this out the other day. I don't know if you know a guy called Malcolm Ballon.
Yes.
Malcolm Ballon was commissioned in 2003-04 by the BBC to do a proper investigation into anti-Semitism at the BBC. And it's never been published.
Oh, wow.
It's a waiting publication. I'm going to start picking up on this story because I got this from somebody the other day. BBC's line was it wouldn't be fair to publish it because the people who spoke to the study were assured of their confidentiality. But so it's quite a big deal, this, I think, and I'm going to be looking into it. But basically investigated hundreds and hundreds of hours of footage, wrote a 20,000-word report.
Yes.
Nobody's ever seen it.
Well, they can remain anonymous. It's not the first time you've had somebody not
Well, the government are very good at redacting reports.
Well,
I mean,
exactly. No, you need to look at... Well, there's a couple of warnings as well, and we talked about this, is when they deliberately do this and make the posts, then absolutely call it out. People, however, a bit slapdash sometimes about what they like and what they retweet, it will all come back to bite them.
There's no issue with that here because...
No, they absolutely were very clear what their views are.
Sure that is what's been going on.
Yeah.
And didn't BBC also verify a story where they claimed that Israeli soldiers had shot Palestinians taking aid off a truck,
Yes.
and it turned out that it was Hamas shooting Palestinians taking aid off a truck.
And all of the sources for the story that they used were all pro-Palestinian in one way, shape or form.
Pro-Palestinian journalists,
active
all
Hamas
operatives on the ground.
Yeah.
So, as somebody I saw wrote about this, BBC Verify couldn't verify a tomato. So that kind of bias is obviously embedded throughout the organisation. Didn't some BBC Jewish employees also speak off the record, I think it was to the Telegraph, about how they found the anti-Semitism in the organisation untenable?
Very uncomfortable place to work if you're Jewish, they said, which is extraordinary. It was only a few weeks ago as well, they sacked that woman from BBC Three, if you remember, who was posting some horrific stuff on Facebook under her own name.
Yes.
She was like a sort of talent booker for BBC Three. And, you know, to be fair to the BBC, at least they did fire her.
Yes.
But they didn't do anything about it until it was brought to their attention.
And this is the problem. I say history's repeating itself because they don't learn the lessons. And they've got, I won't say about trust going in.
No,
I won't.
you've been banned from saying that.
It's the wonderful phrase I always say, but it's true. And the reason it becomes so true is because that's what happens. So they need to learn the lessons. They need to root it out really quickly. But there will be more and more examples. We can predict there will be more and more of these hitting the headlines again.
Yes, exactly right. Bit of royal stuff before we head towards the papers. And I will show you again the Kate and Will's walking around the Windsor farm shop. But before that, there's another story. Harry and Meghan have apparently been officially downgraded.
Saw that.
From the Buckingham Palace website. They used to have 4,000-word individual profiles. They've now vanished and been replaced by shorter 500-word ones. next to Prince Andrew.
Yeah.
dear.
It is extraordinary.
What do you make of that?
I'll tell you what's also extraordinary is why that story was leaked, because obviously somebody from within the PR machine, the self
Well, somebody would have just noticed it. I mean, there are people that check... trust me, there are people in Fleet Street that check royal websites literally by the hour.
You don't think they were briefed?
No.
Okay.
No, because there are people who look for royal websites and royal little sort of nuances.
Yes, but the royal PR machine, knowing that happens, might have done it deliberately.
That's my point.
So Andrew could be right anyway.
My job to be right.
Oh, you see what you mean, that they've changed it at this time?
The royal PR machine hasn't exactly been firing all cylinders lately, has it?
Well, this is the trouble. I mean, the footage that we'll see of William and Kate walking around this farm has already caused lots of people to say, oh, that's definitely not her. So, I mean, it won't make it all go away, will it?
Well,
until they do something
official. People have gone mad about
They have.
They have gone
here's the footage.
mad.
Here's the footage here. I mean, she does look a bit thinner because she's been recovering from...
But she's carrying a very large bag.
She's walking quite briskly, carrying a bag.
It's a huge bag.
But, of course, once you get the madness...
Not that huge.
No, it's not that huge. But, I mean, once you get this madness, there's no escape from it, is there?
But that's the problem. The royal photography and work on that basis.
Feed the madness. Maybe they should just do nothing.
Well, it's like this is like an acceptable conspiracy theory now. A lot of otherwise sensible people are genuinely speculating about some of the mad possibilities out there.
Members of my family are calling me from America and going, what's happening?
The Americans especially.
Yeah, the Americans have gone insane. All the regular news shows are actually covering it as if it's an event.
Yeah, and it's not just America. I mean, I was speaking to people in Japan this morning saying it's hit global headlines. And the problem is this, is that if you look back, lots of these things are photoshopped. You have a look at the Christmas card, which went last year. There are too many fingers, there are too many legs. You have the Queen picture with all her great-grandchildren, grandchildren. There's people have been smiling that's wrong as well. You have the picture of...
but nobody's ever noticed it before.
Well, that's what's happening. Go back now.
They have noticed it. There's been a number of cases of Photoshop that were picked up. Famously, one I really remember was Prince William being accused of having had an airbrushed hair transplant in one of his portraits.
Right.
Yes.
There are loads.
I don't remember any of these, though.
There's no way that all of these portraits of all the kids and Queen Elizabeth are all looking at the camera at the same time. But this is not a new thing. Queen Elizabeth I's coronation portrait taken by Beaton was supposed to be in Westminster. It wasn't. It was taken in Buckingham Palace with a cloth backdrop of Westminster.
You're right.
Image manipulation is nothing new. They just
Cecil
did a
Beaton, exactly.
really bad job of it this time.
Well, that's the trouble. It was awful. And there was no reason to put it out.
But also,
because it was that awful.
But there was no ill intent. And the key to this is not as though she was deep-sea diving or hang gliding or whatever. She was sitting in a chair and tried to make the photo look as good as possible with the children. It was an appalling
and
Photoshop
failed miserably.
job. And, well, it was and she didn't have the ring and the leaves were too...
I mean, if she was a politician, which obviously she isn't,
Yeah.
you would be giving her absolutely 7 bells of all sorts of terrible things.
But
you forgive her because she's not a politician.
I think you should forgive her. And I'll tell you what, we should leave Kate alone. But also, what's interesting is part of the narrative behind all of that. When the photo first came out, it was Prince William who was credited as having taken it. All of a sudden, when people started putting this kill notice, it suddenly became Catherine who had to do the apologies and everything else. So I'm not sure what's going on behind the scenes.
Well, she said she was the one that manipulated it, that's why.
Which is probably... and so what? I mean, photos are manipulated all the time. You look at
again,
Sophie
none of that
Maxwell's
would matter apart from what went before.
Yes.
It's the whole scenario.
The real question is, did she look as well as that? As I say, she wasn't hang gliding, she's not deep-sea diving, she's not leaping up in the air and doing somersaults. It really is her sitting there with that sort of family. It's an appalling Photoshop job, but it's not the first time in history, as you say. Cecil Beaton used to famously do that.
We'll see whether or not it gets them off the hook. Unfortunately, people are fascinated by this stuff, and it's not going to go away.
Release the photo.
Go away. As she comes back, they shouldn't have to release the photo, and they won't be able to because there won't be a picture with all the kids in it at the same time. Probably that's the problem.
No.
But the story will go away because she'll return to her duties.
Yeah.
Or
I would say as well, a lot of this kind of nastiness has been generated by the ridiculous kind of toing and froing between Harry and Meghan and William and Kate, because there's now 2 teams out there on social media.
And they're all briefing each other.
A bunch of Americans who got rid of their monarchy and slightly envious of ours, I think.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I said this earlier last week, I think, when I was working in America in the 80s. I mean, some of the stuff that they published in those days in things like the National Enquirer and the Globe and the Weekly World News were just ludicrous. But because it was America and they were supermarket tabloids, people just ate it up and read it and loved it and thought it was all true. Chuck and die, it was always about, it's just ridiculous.
And it sells,
In a weird way, I think it does suggest that there is some kind of, very strong residual soft power in all of this. The fact that friends of mine from all over the world keep getting in touch, being like, what's going on with the Kate photo. I mean, there's nothing else. Certainly, there are very few politicians in the world that command this level of interest.
Yeah, exactly right. So in a way, it's actually boosted the royal family.
I don't know about that.
I think it has.
It does show that there is an abiding in this institution that we're often told is completely irrelevant in this day and age.
Absolutely right. Anyway, listen, you're watching The Independent Republic of Mike Graham. Coming up next, the bore of Banksy's new mural. And, of course, all the best of tomorrow's news in the papers. Stay exactly where you are. Welcome back. You're watching The Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here on Talk TV. Now, it's time for this.
The world of woke.
It had to be Islington, didn't it? The site of the latest piece of art by the supposedly upper-crust revolutionary Banksy. Done to make it look like a Just Stop Oil protest. It's got it all, apparently. Even a picture of Jeremy Corbyn walking past to have a look. But really, what is the point? Champagne socialists and socialist workers have united in rapture at the amazing work, which looks like someone has thrown a lot of green paint at a wall alongside a caricature of a protester holding a pressure hose next to it. Locals are purring about how proud and delighted it's made them. One of Sellers said, "It felt like a personal message to us. We just feel so proud." Banksy expert James Peake said, "The message is clear, nature's struggling and it's up to us to help it grow back." They're all excited, you see, because the wall in question has an old tree just in front of it, and the green paint is supposed to signify actual leaves, even though it clearly doesn't. A pathetic, straw-clutching piece of behaviour. They also love that it is the exact same shade of green used by Islington Council for signs in the area. How cool. Of course, some of the residents are hoping that it might make their properties more valuable. Those would be the socialists who don't like money. Those living in poverty in social housing are more concerned that their rents might go up as a result. The owner of the building, one Alex Giorgio, said he won't put any rents up, but he would sell the whole building to the highest bidder if he's made a generous enough offer. The bottom line is that the mural, whether you like it or not, is very much a symbol of why Britain is broken. The trendies are all bowled over by what is effectively a bit of graffiti behind a dead tree. It doesn't signify growth or nature or anything, really. In fact, it might rather ironically result in the eviction of the people living there. The inclusion of one of the eco-nutters in the picture rather gives away Banksy's leanings. And if he thinks those morons are worthy of art, he's in a worse place than I thought. Perhaps they could come and throw a load of paint over it. Oh, podcast presenter Sally Flatman rushed down to see it after hearing about it on the radio. To me, it speaks about how precious green spaces are and how we need more of them in our urban areas. Heaven preserve us, is all I'll say.
The world of woke.
So, the panel are back with me. We are here with Madeline, with Laura, and with Andrew. The latest Banksy, I'm afraid no Banksy really does it for me. It just looks like somebody's thrown a load of paint over a wall. I'm sorry if that makes me a Philistine. It's not really art to me.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
And there are all these people going, but it's behind this tree, and the tree is actually dying, right?
Yes.
So the council have already said we're not going to be able to spend much more money on keeping it alive. And if you look really, really from far away and you squint your eyes, it looks like it's got green leaves. It doesn't. I'm sorry, it doesn't.
I'm surprised it's still there, because the last time Banksy allegedly did something, somebody went in the middle of the night and chipped it away because it's worth a fortune.
Well, it's quite big. I think you'd need
take a little bit
lorries
of time.
to chip it away and take it,
I did like that one that he had where it's self-shredded.
Yes.
Right after it was sold.
Yes.
Yes.
That was proper.
Now that's funny.
Proper Emperor's New
That
Clothes
is funny.
And it increased in value as a a didn't it, is what they said.
Yeah,
The
well,
destruction
except it
was-
didn't exist.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the big story of the night. There's a new James Bond in town.
Yes.
Now, people have been talking about this for a long time. The Sun have got an exclusive in which they say that a man that you've heard of, and I haven't really, Aaron Taylor Johnson, who I've never heard of. I know this is going to sound terrible, but what's he been in?
He was in Nowhere Boy, I think, where he plays a young John Lennon.
Okay.
And women of my vintage will remember him from Angus Thongs and Perfect Snogging.
Okay, so I've never seen
which
that.
is a classic chick flick.
Okay.
But to be honest, he mostly plays, and I think he's also in the Kingsman films, which is a kind of spy spoof.
Yes.
So
I've seen one of those, but without very
think
much
he's in
enthusiasm.
I think he was in one of those, but he's almost more of a character actor.
Yeah.
And he's he's young too. He's 33.
He's 33. It says
And
he
he's
was
married to a director who's
Yeah.
23 years older than him.
Good luck to him.
There you go.
Clearly, they wanted to have somebody who could possibly do it for quite a long time. You know, they want to have someone who could conceivably do it for another 15 years or something.
Yes.
But I don't know if it's confirmed. He's been offered the role.
He's been offered the role.
Yes.
And I think it was rumoured that he went to the head of the betting odds recently because he was said to have had a very successful meeting with Barbara Broccoli.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to, I don't know if he'll be good or bad. I'm a big fan of Bond. Like, for me, the big criteria, I just long to know, is he a fan of Bond?
Yes.
Because I feel like
'Cause
for a
that's what
long
you
time,
want.
the people who've been in charge of the franchise, some of the directors who've done it recently, seem to absolutely despise Bond. They spend all their promotional interviews, just slagging off like
Right.
Sean Connery, Bond, and
Yes,
that kind of thing. And I just
exactly.
think it's a bit like we were saying with the museums. Why do these wonderful institutions keep being given to people
Yeah.
who fundamentally hate them?
It's more about them, isn't it? It's like, I'm
Yeah.
directing a Bond film, so I'll make it in my own image.
What
Yeah.
ideology can I squeeze in? I just
Yeah.
can't believe what they did with Bond by the end.
I
by
know.
the end.
Are we allowed
I'm
to
not-
say yet,
I'm not
or is it
sure.
still
I'm
not
not
something?
sure.
No, I
we can
don't want to spoil it for them. Probably not.
I think everybody's seen it. Who's
I
going
mean,
to see it?
after killing
They
them off,
kill him, they kill
Yeah,
him.
he's dead at the end.
Oh,
Yeah.
no! Don't
And he
say
has a horrible child.
after killing him off at the end, I'm not sure I can watch another Bond film.
It's
But
sort of-
I might have watched another Bond film if Henry Cavill is Bond. Because
Ah,
I
you
think
see.
he would make a perfect James Bond.
Yeah.
He'd be
I'd watch James Bond for Henry Cavill in a
Yeah.
while, but
I-
I'll have to be really
and you-
convinced, like you, that they like Bond and they're not going to kill him off
I
or
have
make him
some
woke.
I'll tell you one thing. I don't think anybody's made any money on this. I don't know anybody who put Aaron in the frame before today. He looks like a comedy James Bond, doesn't he?
Well,
I think he's got more of a comedy
This
sort
also,
of look about
this
him.
also
he
does
was
away with
very
my,
good. There were
theory.
very good odds on him.
Yeah, my theory, you see, was that they wouldn't, because I said this to my kids, you
Yes.
don't actually see him dying.
Yes.
And I said, it's possible they'll bring him back.
Yes.
And they'll say, actually, that didn't happen. Yes, he was terribly badly injured. Yes, there was a big explosion. But
Right.
amazingly, well, they did it in Dallas, didn't they?
Well,
Yes.
he'll have,
Bobby Ewan in the
We could do
shower.
anything, yeah.
You
He'll
remember
have
that?
Bobby
The
Ewan.
dream sequence, absolutely.
if they bring him back and he's, been terribly badly injured, then he'll be basically like Blofeld after his
Yes.
injury.
Yes.
He's like in a wheelchair. Like, "Rrr." I'm not sure you can have two of those.
No,
can't
that's
have
true.
to-
Or indeed the seduction.
But it's
scenes
good. I
might
mean,
be
we
a
talk
bit
about the royal
different.
family still being, part
Yes.
of the news cycle. I'm glad to see that James Bond is still part of the news
Oh,
cycle.
they love it.
But unfortunately, as you say, now it's more about who's singing the song
Yes.
and who's directing it.
I thought they were very clever last time because everybody talked about having a woman being James Bond, and actually what they
Well,
did,
they had a woman as
being
007.
007.
She was good.
That was a clever, absolutely very clever way of doing it.
But she couldn't
But
be James Bond.
Bond can't be a woman.
No.
No, but
Just can't.
can be 007 is their point.
Yeah.
And that's
Well,
what
we'll look forward to it. The other story, by the way, I'm just told that apparently 9 of the 10 amendments have now
Hurrah!
been
Have they all
rejected.
been thrown
They've all
out?
been thrown out. So
I want the one where they say you have to abide by the law and
Yes.
throw that one out.
I think that was
That'd
the
be
first
glorious.
one.
They threw
I
it
think
out.
That was the first one. Now let's talk about diets because the Metro
Yes.
got a story about celebrity 16/8 fast.
Yes,
Doubles
very good for you.
Doubles the risk of dying, according to.
Oh, does it? Well,
So actually, it's not very good for you. So if you're doing that, you've got double the risk of dying. I don't even know what it is, but I presume it's
It's one of these ones.
8 hours on, 16
eat,
hours
eat
off.
for
or
8
something.
hours, not eat for 16. The thing about this, does it double your risk of dying? I don't know. I mean, the idea of doing this sounds.
Well, living doubles your risk of dying.
yes.
Basically.
It sounds like a torturous diet, but often the methodology around these diets and as they're reported is very
Right.
flaky.
Also,
very flaky.
call me
indeed.
old-fashioned, but is it not normal to sort of eat for, I don't know, more like, say, 4 hours rather than... If you're eating for 8 hours, I don't think you're going to lose any weight, are
No,
you?
but that's the window that you're allowed to eat in.
Oh, I see.
Oh, you're not eating solidly for 8
Yeah,
hours.
Oh, right. That's the thing.
I'll have
This is
4
why I'm not
kebabs
good at
per
this stuff, You mean, I've got another 7 hours to go.
Yeah,
The-
like,
the-
like,
the idea-
like the Brian Butterfield diet.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the idea is that your body can recuperate, and that's so you have a big period of time. So your 8 hours you eat in a sort of sensible way.
My
You then
problem with diets is drinking.
I just think that.
Oh,
people
yes.
are-
I've never yet found a
Yeah.
diet that you can drink in.
Well, actually, there have been studies, proper robust ones, that show that if you switch your calories from food to alcohol, you don't gain any weight. In fact, you lose weight. So
Really?
you can
Well,
have a
that's
liquid
not
only
been my
diet.
experience.
I don't know
I
why
can tell you.
I'm not a size 8 then.
When I was in America before I got married, my fiance made me go on a diet.
Yes.
It's 1,500 calories a day, which, as I worked out, was only 3 vodka and grapefruit juices.
Oh, is that right? Is
So
that right?
that was what I did. I just
How
drank
many
3 vodka
units are in
grapefruit
your
juice.
vodka?
Yeah.
These
and
are
how
American
much-
measures.
Oh.
There was about that much vodka in each glass.
Well-
It took me a long time to get used to English measures when I came back.
Well,
10 years of that.
I think you're right. There's a lot of calories in alcohol. You're absolutely right. What was interesting about the study, there was 20,000 people, and they said there was 91% more likely to have cardiovascular issues
Right.
as a result of going on the
Jennifer
fast.
Aniston apparently likes this diet.
You have to look at what they're eating as
Yes.
well. Like
Yeah.
maybe they're eating a lot of seed oils and
Maybe they
and
misunderstood the 8
processed
hours.
food, or
Lots of
maybe they're
kebabs,
eating
yes.
vegan
Also,
food. They could be eating other foods that aren't actually good for you.
Also, I'm sorry, but if you're comparing people who've gone on a diet with people who are eating normally, it's possible that the people who are on the diet are on it because they're overweight. In
Yes.
which case, it's not
Yes.
a very good control
Right.
group, is it?
I actually heard somebody the other day saying that they wanted to put some weight on so that they would qualify for these fat injections.
Oh, is that right? For the
Ozempic.
Wegovy.
Isn't that kind of
Wegovy.
defeating the object? Which you're going to put weight on so the
Yes.
doctor will give you them. Why don't you just stay as you are?
I think it's quite good logic, actually. Because you have to be a certain weight to qualify.
Yeah, there's other way I
and
give it to
people,
you.
and eating is fun. So you're
Right.
like, I can have a great month of picking out, and then it will just drop off me.
But
Really?
the trouble is with Wegovy.
It's a new theory. We
Yeah.
could go with that, but we're out of time.
Out
Amazing.
of time.
Thank you, guys. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. That's all from me tonight. You've been watching The Independent Republic of Mike Graham. Thank you to Madeline. Thank you to Laura. Thank you to Andrew. I'll see you all tomorrow at 8 p.m. after Just Stop Oil have been ridden from the country, hopefully, only on Talk TV. See you then.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
The front page of the Times has got that fantastic photograph of Obama. Surprising. Well, I'm sure not the residents of number 10 Downing Street, but maybe the reporters outside when he arrived for that meeting yesterday with the Prime Minister. But the headline is Sunak risks losing key votes on the Rwanda bill, as we've just been talking about. They also have a story about fasting. They say it's linked to increased risk from heart attacks and strokes. Chat about that in a minute or so. The Daily Telegraph has Rachel Reeves. She's going to make a speech a little bit later on today. This is, of course, Labour's shadow chancellor. She's going to say that Britain faces a 1979 moment. Her argument today is that she will vow that a Labour government would work with business to create a decade of national renewal. Well, in the business news in about half an hour's time, we're going to look at sort of her pitch about how she wants to reform the Treasury. But there's also a photograph, and you may remember this one. It is a picture of Elizabeth II with some of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Now, that was taken by the Princess of Wales, and the allegations are that this picture too was edited at source. That's according to Getty Images. It's a brilliant photograph. As ever, everyone looks quite charming, smiling. You do think, well, it is brilliant to get all those children looking wonderfully sort of put together in one photograph. We'll look at those allegations as well. The Sun say, great to see you again, Kate. They've got what is a blurry image, a freeze frame from a video that was taken of Kate out yesterday for the first time in public that she's been seen since having that surgery in January. Will that end the conspiracy? I think that's unlikely. The Daily Mail says Harry and Meghan are downgraded by the palace. So there's lots of royal news about today. Joining me to go through the papers in more detail is Andrew Eborn, barrister, broadcaster, president of Octopus TV. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning. Always a joy to join you.
Shall we start with the royals? I mean,
Yes.
The conspiracy online has been unbelievable. I mean, I can't, but people seem to think because I'm sort of remotely involved in news, I must have the inside scoop on what's happening with the royals. And I'm getting a very surprising number of texts from people saying, can you tell me what's going on? Like I've got sort of the inside voice of Kensington Palace. I mean, finally, look, the Sun is saying this is their royal world exclusive, this first photograph. She's been seen out and about. Do you think this is going to stop the conspiracy chatter?
Oh, of course not. I mean, people love to chatter about these things. And as you know, I do a regular series called Fake or Fact. And we looked at all the pictures which have been doctored over the years. I mean, Cecil Beaton was famous at making sure that pictures of royals were picture perfect. And I talked about the Wales monochrome Christmas card, you might remember from last year. If you look at that, basically they have the white rabbit fingers are missing on one of Louis's hands, and Kate's second foot is hidden and no extra legs. I also spoke about the 10 children smiling, the 97th birthday of Queen Elizabeth. It's clearly doctored. The question here, however, is that there's no ill intent. To try and make a photo look as good as possible is not exactly showing people that she's jumping out of aeroplanes or going deep sea diving. So people love to have conspiracy theories, and they come about because there's a vacuum. When information is not shared, people come up with their own theories as to what's happening. And I think poor old Kate, she's been a victim of this, and I think we should leave her alone, quite frankly.
Do you think in hindsight, Andrew, that the palace should maybe have been more transparent about what was actually going on, which then wouldn't have created that vacuum?
Well, I like the old mantra which they used to have, never complain, never explain, and it served the royal family so very well for very long. It was Disraeli who originally came up with that. And the difficulty is now they're sharing so much information in this day of social media where basically we want to find out everything about them. And as soon as we don't share a bit of information, that's what happens. And Kate was just over the road from me at Regent's Park at the London Clinic. And also Charles was there at the same sort of time, and they had the press pack outside hanging on every possible word for some sort of information. I go back to what I say beforehand. She's a woman recovering from obviously very serious surgery, and we should let her be.
I guess the challenge is they don't want to add fuel to the conspiracy, and that's where things like edited photographs do more harm than they do help.
No, you're absolutely right. It was naive, let me put it that way, to put out an edited photo. The way that the press work, as you know, the media says you can't have manipulated photos. It's in the rules and regulations of these photo agencies. And that's why they put out this kill notice. But because the public don't necessarily understand or haven't had it explained to them what a kill notice means, you think, oh, it's fake news. There must be a terrible picture from somewhere else. It was on a Vogue magazine cover and all these other crazy conspiracy theories. It was basically a lady trying to make sure the photo looked as great as possible. And as you know, what happens, especially in fashion photos, they take several of these photos. Is the sort of click which they do, and they try and see Rosie's hair looks brilliant in this and her smile is even more charming in this. So they do a composite of lots of different shots to basically get the best one. And that's what happened here.
Which is fine if it's in a fashion magazine, but maybe not so if it's in a news article. I think that was the tension. We're going to talk a bit about potholes a little bit later on in the programme. But front page of The Telegraph is this story that councils are launching what they're describing as a new war on motorists as half of drivers face fines. Councils are applying for the right to be able to fine motorists if drivers get caught, let's say, in yellow boxes, make illegal U-turns or drive in a bus lane when it's not permitted. I kind of think, fair enough, Andrew.
Oh, it's totally fair enough. And actually, it's a slightly misleading headline because it's not actually new penalties that are being introduced. What it is where does the money go? And these cash-strapped councils basically will now be able to receive this money rather than going into the central pot. And that's the principle. They're talking about cars being wallets on wheels, if you like.
Yeah, that's the AA who said we were wallets on wheels when we're driving.
Exactly. So that's what's happening. It's a question about where will the money go? And I think the councils will be very, very grateful for that. What they're saying is that the funds recouped from these enforcement notices and money raised can only be used for certain purposes, such as recouping the costs of enforcement, obviously, but also paying for things like public transport and funding highway improvements, which a lot of people talk about when you talk about potholes and things like that. The councils need the money. Giving them an incentive to collect it is what this is really about.
Yes, and I guess the challenge is it's not good. The money isn't going to the police, you'll find it's going to your local council instead.
Exactly.
We'll talk about driving in a little bit more detail. Fasting, we've heard about the Prime Minister's sort of dietary habits in the last sort of few months or so. Front page of the Times says, diets where people eat only during an 8-hour daily window and fast for the rest of the day. Actually, you could be doing yourself some harm. The research is suggesting that has an increased risk of death from heart attacks and strokes. It's another story, Andrew, of when you think you're trying to do something to benefit yourself, but yet there are traps you may be falling into.
You're absolutely right, Rosie. What happens? You have one day you have this is the best thing for you ever, and the next day this is the worst thing for you ever. Celebrities such as Jennifer Aniston, Hugh Jackman, Kourtney Kardashian, I know you follow them all the time, Scarlett Johansson, they all go for this particular diet. And what happens is the idea is you eat for just for 8 hours and the rest of the time you fast because it gives your body time to recover. Now, what's happened is they did a study of about 20,000 adults, average age of 49, and they were tracked for 17 years, can you believe it? And they looked within that period, the 20,000, they worked out that 840 died of heart attacks and strokes. And basically those who were eating less than 8 hours a day, or only within those sort of 8 hours a day, had a 91% higher risk of death from these causes, according to the results. And that's quite shocking. More information is needed. And they do say, well, you've got to be slightly more cautious about these sort of diets.
Of course, yeah, cautious about the diets, and I think cautious about the research as well, because, of course, we can't infer cause and effect. And I think the volunteers that took part in the study were asked about their eating patterns on 2 days of the week, and then it was sort of assumed they followed the same schedule for years to come. I have not stuck to a diet myself for years. I think not even 1 year in total. So the idea that maybe you'd be doing it for 17, I think, is extremely complimentary to the volunteers taking part in the survey.
I think that's absolutely right. I have a seafood diet. Basically, I see food and I eat it.
I can imagine. The story in the Times, they were talking about this on Times Radio Breakfast yesterday, actually. That's not the way to treat Thatcher, the V&A has been told. Margaret Thatcher was listed as a contemporary villain at the museum.
Yes.
But in that list...
I went down there. Yeah.
Oh, really? Well, I mean, Osama bin Laden is on it. Should Margaret Thatcher be in that category?
Well, I'll tell you what it is, and it's a slightly misleading story. I did pop down to the V&A yesterday when the story broke, and I had a look at the exhibition. And it's all about comedy, and comedy, by its very nature, knocks those in power. And they have pictures of Queen Elizabeth, they have pictures of Tony Blair, they have Boris Johnson, and obviously, in amongst all that sort of stuff, they have Maggie Thatcher. And the point that they make in the Punch and Judy summary, which is basically from the 16th century Italian street performer, is where it all came from, is that they're knocking public figures, and they say over the years the evil character in this seaside puppet show has shifted from the devil to unpopular public figures, including Adolf Hitler, Margaret Thatcher, and Osama bin Laden, as contemporary villains. Now, it does seem unfortunate that whoever wrote that copy put Maggie together with Hitler and Osama bin Laden, but the intention behind it is to highlight how comedy works, and comedy works by knocking people in the public eye, and that's the story.
Yes, I mean, it was about sort of, who'd been villains then in the traditional Punch and Judy puppet show. Sir Connor Burns, a Conservative MP, was pretty cross about this. He said whoever wrote that caption should be called up publicly for being a moron, or perhaps more usefully sent to read a Ladybird book of modern world history.
That's the way to do it.
He said this is sadly symptomatic of the woke. Oh, you can imagine how the rest of that goes on. Let's not give it any more airtime. There are lots of photographs, and it's slightly hard to describe this, but the new Banksy mural, which is a tree that, of course, doesn't have any of its leaves on it, looks quite sort of brutalist. And Banksy has spray painted green paint onto the backing of kind of a wall where the tree's standing in front of it to make it look like it's full of foliage. It's proving pretty popular. Lots of people want to go and see it. You've been to the V&A for some research for the paper review. Andrew, will you go and visit the Banksy tree too?
Well, it's not too far from me. Absolutely. I'll go and climb the Banksy tree and maybe even make an offer for the place. So Alex Georgia, who's an estate agent who bought property in 2012 for $400,000, he says it's worth about $1.3 million now. But as a result of the Banksy being there, it's going to be worth considerably more. And he joked about putting up the rent and things like that. I think it's glorious. And Banksy apparently has come out and said, yes, it is one of my works. What's interesting with these sort of works, though, Rosie, you might recall that last time a Banksy appeared, somebody came and took it off.
Oh, yes. That was the one with the fridge, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. I think this is a bit too big to take off the wall. But certainly,
well, we've had lots of stories about people chopping down trees recently, so you could try and take the tree and the wall with it.
I think that's a great idea. Yes, well, Jeremy, it's not about a good idea. We're going to absolutely discourage people from doing that. But even people like Jeremy Corbyn have got along to get their photo opportunity to say how proud and delighted they are.
Well, if it goes missing, Andrew, you're going to be suspect number one now, I have to say.
Soon twig, branch out into crime. Definitely not.
And we should do a pun-ometer in this paper review with Andrew every time he comes on and see how many he manages to filter in. Thank you so much,
Andrew. The pun is mightier than the sword. It's going to be good. Lovely to see you, Rosie. Take care.
You so much. Andrew Eborn, barrister, broadcaster and president of Octopus TV.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.